Hello, I'm Audible Walker coming to you from the Mosaic Work Studio with a video from a new series focused on product. Being involved in building digital products for more than 12 years, we at Mosaic Works are always looking for ways to improve the way digital products are built. Back in 2017, we've decided to learn more from other product people, so we've created the Product Leaders Gathering. Practitioners on product, business, and technology passionate about building successful products are sharing strategies and techniques for product design, development, and validation. One of the speakers, Onwah Tsang, shared his insights on being a jack of all trades, master of none. Onwah stated that in an era dominated by an online-first approach, complex algorithms, and massive datasets, having some technical skills might open up new opportunities. In his talk, he explores how specialists such as product managers, designers, or journalists can benefit from learning how to code, and getting into it is not as difficult as it may seem. Thank you and enjoy the talk.
So this talk's about being a jack of all trades, master of none, and I'm just here to kind of share a few of the lessons from my experience of working in product teams, leading product teams, and actually delivering technology. Just a brief background about me. So my name's Onwah. I have about 10 years of experience in leading product teams and building technology with organizations such as the BBC, Microsoft, and across UK government, specifically the Home Office. And my talk today is about jack of all trades, master of none. Just a show of hands, how many of you have actually heard this term before? And of those of you who've got the hands up, who can shout out what it means to them? Jack of all trades, master of none. Any volunteers? No, we're all feeling a bit shy today.
It's a person that is very good at various subjects but doesn't excel at any subject. So
Yeah.
it's a continuation to that.
Spot on. So you just to kind of repeat it for the room there, it's about someone who can kind of do a bit of everything but isn't necessarily a master of a particular craft or a skill. But actually, when you're working in product teams, there is definitely value to having a broad skill set, certainly working as a product leader. And I think that's something that has been a lesson for me and something that I've been developing. So actually, what I think is more appropriate is being a jack of many trades and the master of one. You still have your core specialism, perhaps as a product leader, perhaps as a product designer, UX, research, but you have an expanded capability set to draw on those skills to facilitate the product development process. So let's rewind a little bit, though. Let's have a look at what product leaders do and one of the core aspects of being a product leader. So we mentioned this morning by the keynote speaker about SpaceX. And the video in the background here I've borrowed from SpaceX. And that's a concept video that they've released a few months ago about their vision, their grand vision, their product roadmap of turning the human race into an interplanetary species. A very grand aspiration, probably much grander than anything that we in this room would ever aspire to try and achieve. But the video is a really good way to articulate a tangible product roadmap. It isn't just a pie-in-the-sky video of how he might achieve this. And if you've been following any of the developments of SpaceX over the last sort of 12 to 18 months, you'll see that some of the ideas presented in this video are actually becoming a reality, whether it's launching satellite payloads into space, delivering cargo to the International Space Station. These are all represented as elements of a product roadmap to achieve a much grander vision. So I think that's really relevant to what we're talking about here today. And obviously this particular example is a very complex challenge, but I think we can apply complexity and difficulty with all the products that we work on. And what I attribute to complexity and effort is about 20% is actually in coming up with the idea. As product leaders, as UX specialists, as designers, we're all fantastic at coming up with ideas. And that's perhaps 20% of the effort in terms of articulating it. The other difficulty is actually in getting someone to pay for it. So getting the green light for your idea. So what are some of the mechanisms for achieving that or overcoming that or mitigating the difficulties of actually gaining client sign-off, gaining stakeholder buy-in with your idea? I think a really famous design agency called IDEO articulated this quite well. And it said the picture is worth 1,000 words, then a prototype is worth 1,000 meetings. How many of you in this room can perhaps resonate with that idea? If you're documenting a particular idea, you're writing about it, or if you're even drawing it in static form, it's a very two-dimensional way of expressing and articulating your idea. But when you actually can present something in front of stakeholders, in front of a client, something that's quite tangible, something they can touch and feel, there's a lot of power and value to be added as part of that process. So that's all good and well, doing prototypes. But we work in the real world. We have constraints. We have no budget. It's a typical scenario. I don't know if there's something that you can relate to, but it's a scenario that comes up time and time again in every product team that I've worked on, from the largest organizations like Microsoft and BBC to smaller government agencies across the UK. This scenario comes up. Your teams are 95% utilized. You can't borrow a resource. That term of beg, borrow, and steal to make your ideas happen doesn't necessarily apply in all scenarios. So what are the alternatives? Well, I had a look at what some of the product leaders do to try and overcome this challenge and how some of the most successful product leaders are tackling this particular problem. So these are product leaders who prototype. I've got 3 examples of people who are visionary product leaders and how they've managed to turn their product ideas into reality and some of the mechanisms in which they've taken to achieve that. Probably one of the most well-known examples is Apple. Early days of Apple, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak obviously had this grand vision, this roadmap of making home desktop computing a reality. But it's all good and well having an idea if you're not able to translate that into something tangible. And if you look at some of the early products that came out of Apple, they weren't the slick, shiny products that you use today. They were off-the-shelf components that are pulled from electrical retailers, kind of bodged together. And you might argue that it was much more difficult back then to produce things. There was no AWS cloud hosting where you can spin up environments to support your projects. There were no Raspberry Pis that you can buy, which has all the components that you need to build your prototypes. So arguably, Apple were one of the kind of early leaders in using prototypes to actually gain buy-in, to test their market, and turn some of their product ideas into reality. Who recognizes these two? So Larry and Sergey Brin. Founders of Google in the mid-90s had the idea of actually changing the way search engines worked, which back then was purely based on number of clicks to search engine results and ranking search results to that. They took their kind of engineering experience, their background in mathematics at Stanford, and actually applied that to the concept of a vision for how search engines might work in the future, which is based on relationships. But again, they didn't just have an idea and then suddenly had the ability to produce it. They applied their own talents and experience in actually making that happen, hosting the early versions of Google on the Stanford domain. And a more recent example, Mark Zuckerberg. If you've seen the film, read the books, you'll be familiar with his backstory, coming up with what was originally FaceMash, which is perhaps a slightly naughty idea of his to scrape content across Harvard campus in a rating system in connecting profiles. He then actually evolved that idea into what would eventually become Facebook. But he did that not because he was an engineer, but his primary thing was being a visionary product leader. And he had the skills and experience and talent to actually make that a reality. So some examples of people who I believe are jack of many trades, master of one. Visionary product leaders who also had some experience, some knowledge to be able to turn those ideas into reality. And that's something that I really want you guys to take away with you today. So hopefully you get that concept, but the next question might be, well, how do I do this? How do I take this idea? How do I take this principle and this concept and turn it into something that's practical in the roles that we are in? Programming language. The barriers to entry of programming for many people are considered to be too high. Where do you even begin to learn a programming language? So many different types, so many different frameworks. It seems every week there's something new and something different that you have to learn as a programmer. But I think what I'd say to that is swipe that all aside and take the languages and the tools and techniques that are easiest to get hold of. Today I'm focusing on HTML, which you see on the screen here, a very simple example of that. But rather than me talking about how easy it is to do it, because as you might be a bit skeptical about how easy it really is to actually learn HTML or learn a programming language, let me show you. So this is the BBC iPlayer website. It's a video on demand service for the BBC UK public broadcaster. I'm just using a standard desktop web browser, Opera in this case, which has a number of tools that are built in, which allows you to customize and prototype ideas on the fly in the web browser without necessarily writing code. You can make adjustments and test your ideas. This is a very simple example of how you might do that. And all I'm doing there is really just adjusting that play button to make it more visible, but I'm also going to change the branding of that button to better reflect the channel in which this program belongs to. So we're actually just going to pop that into red, but we see a conflict with the play button there, so we're just going to make a further adjustment to make that a bit clearer. So anyone can do this. You can go on any site, go onto your client site, go onto your own product sites, and start tinkering with it. But you can't do that unless you know where to look. So having some knowledge of HTML programming doesn't mean you have to write it. It means having the knowledge to be able to connect with products and services and actually experiment with ideas on the fly. Let's take another example. A site you'll be familiar with, Product Leaders. So again, we're going to make some adjustments to the design and change font type. We're just going to put a bit more emphasis on that with the font weight, and we're just going to give the actual title a bit of a boost. And within just a few seconds, without me rewriting any code, the site looks significantly different. Let's see what else we can do. So I'm just still tinkering with some of the font weight settings. Let's have a go at changing the banner there. So again, that's an example of using tools that doesn't require budget, doesn't require permission from your IT department, which is always a constraint, or a constraint that I've often found, and you can start tinkering, but obviously you need to know where to look and how to make these adjustments. If we move the example on, UX designers often use wireframing tools and wireframing products to articulate the idea. I mentioned early on in this talk that the way in which we propose and express our ideas is often in a very two-dimensional way. One of the ways in which we can make that more three-dimensional is using prototyping, using something that's driven by some basic code. And there's lots of frameworks out there which comprises toolkits, elements that you can pull together, and actually constructing things like a dashboard. And this one's an example of a Bootstrap framework about being able to present that in front of your clients as a tangible thing that they can touch, use, and feel, and really get an appreciation for your idea, how it works, because there's nothing more than, nothing better than doing that when they actually have their hands on it. Another example I want to share, slight diversion, is about journalists. Journalists and journalism as a sector is traditionally not up there in terms of technology, not really embracing technology, but there's been a change in the last few years when you've got presidents who don't necessarily tell the truth, when you've got fake news, fake media, when you've got other sources like leaks, document exports, document dumps on the web. Journalists now have to go to where the story is, and that location isn't necessarily a physical location or a physical event. Sometimes that location is online, is in the datasets that are published by governments, that are leaked by organizations. And I encourage you to have a look at have a listen to the podcast, which is about how BBC journalists are actually learning SQL code in order to be able to crunch the data, interrogate data. And again, this is 5 years ago. If you told me that journalists are learning SQL code, I'd be thinking, what are you talking about? Barriers to entry, I mentioned before. Over 6 million videos on YouTube and just under 8 million links on Google, all about website development, and over 1,000 online courses on Coursera, again about website development. We all learn in different ways. Some ways work better than others, And the beauty of the web is that you have a multitude of options. So if one way doesn't work for you, if following a step-by-step guide tutorial doesn't work for you, maybe try a video, maybe try a more structured learning approach with online courses. So jack of many trades, master of one. Hopefully you've gained an appreciation for how learning and expanding your scope of what you are as a product leader will help you in your roles. Thank you.
This was Onwah Tsang talk at the first edition of Product Leader Summit back in 2017. We're coming back next week with another video on product. Until then, don't forget to think, design, and work smart.